So thanks a lot for inviting me to share some thoughts. My name is Mike Wilkes, and I'm, as Laine mentioned, the Senior Cybersecurity Advisor with Ammolite Security. And today's topic is supply chain security in the age of AI and OT. And I don't have to explain OT to this group, right? Because it's part of your name, and so you all know what operations technology is and Internet of Things. But I wanted to explore some third-party risk management. I believe that's a part of everyone's mission to protect against bad things happening. And continuous monitoring is one of the perspectives I like to try to introduce. So how do we get from a point in time just sending out questionnaires to third parties and having a question on that questionnaire be, have you been breached in the last 12 months? And then, of course, if someone says yes, that's the last time or last moment at which you'd like to go shields up, right? And say, oh no. And so we need to have continuous monitoring. We can't just do this sort of periodically and have an annual pen test and that kind of thing. So continuous security assessment is one of the things I think that unveils, the potential to stop business disruptions because you have better monitoring. So we'll talk a little bit about the oil and gas industry, which I've worked in, a little bit about municipal utilities, and a tabletop exercise that I did for Cyber Alberta, where I created a scenario around a water treatment facility, and talk a little bit about advanced manufacturing as well. So a little bit about myself before we dive in, so you know who is presenting and where I come from. So I have degrees in philosophy, UW-Madison, UW-Wisconsin is the UW and the UW part. I also have a master's degree in the philosophy of education from Stanford, class of 91. And that means I'm pretty old. I've been around a while, since before the internet, I guess you could say even. I wrote a book for Cisco Press back in 2002. For a certification that doesn't exist anymore, called the Cisco Internet Solution Specialist. One of the feathers in my cap was working at a company called Organic in San Francisco during the dot-com bubble. And it was there I was privileged to lead a team of DevOps engineers that gave birth to Starbucks.com, their very first website back in 1998. I also led the team that gave PlayStation.com their website when they launched the PS2. And I also did Blockbuster and Macy's. No logos on here for those, but that was part of the whole, Web 1.0 era. After about 5 rounds of layoffs and being one of the last people standing at Organic, working there, I decided to quit and move to Europe, and wanted to work on European infrastructure. And so I did banking. I built Rabobank's direct banks. Also built DR infrastructure for ING, and got to do fun things as well for KLM. That logo, I should probably fit that one on here because most people know KLM. And anyway, then I moved back to the US in 2013 and ran the Chicago Mercantile Exchange enterprise server platform. We had about 10,000 servers and $1 quadrillion in contracts traded. Not everyone gets to use the number quadrillion, but basically it's 1,000 trillion, right? And so it's a pretty big number. And it was a significantly important financial institution, as they call it, a CFI. After the CME group, I ran AQR Capital, which is a hedge fund up in Connecticut, infrastructure there for about 184 billion assets under management. Then I pivoted into the music and entertainment business, and I've been the CISO at Marvel, where I like to joke it was my job to keep Iron Man safe, and that's my tagline. I'm sticking to it. It's pretty cool. And after I left, I wasn't there to protect him. So if you saw Endgame or Infinity War, poor Iron Man did not have me to keep him from harm's way. I was also the CISO at ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. And I'm a jazz musician. I play drums, and I'm an ASCAP member. And so this pays the people that write the songs. In Canada, I think it's called CCAM, SCCAM. That's a sister organization that also makes sure that what is his name? Sean, man. What's his name? The singer, the famous Canadian one that made it big. Trying to think, Sean. Can't remember the last name anyway at the moment. But anyway, we paid the royalties. It was about 1.8 billion in revenue last year. When I was there, it was around 1.2 billion in revenue. And I love doing music and cybersecurity at the same time. In 2019, I started teaching at NYU, and 2020, I was the CISO at Security Scorecard. I'll talk a little bit about Security Scorecard on a couple of slides later. It's a security ratings company, and it's entered into a relationship actually with the cyber security infrastructure for the Canadian ministries. I'm also was nominated in 2020 to the World Economic Forum as a technology pioneer, and I worked on writing oil and gas cyber resilience case studies and white papers. And more recently, I was invited to join the Quantum Security Working Group, which is a pretty sexy topic when you think about quantum computers and potentially doing quantum things and machine learning as well. I've also been a healthcare startup CISO for LARC, which does a mobile diabetes mobile prevention, a mobile coaching app for diabetes prevention. But then, of course, out came GLP-1s and Ozempic, and everyone just took a pill to lose weight. So the best market for mobile coaching app to make good life decisions, unfortunately, at the moment. Then a startup called the Security Agency, and then I started teaching at Columbia University this semester. And then last fall, I was briefly the first ever CISO for Major League Soccer. So some fun stories to tell about that another time. But enough about me. Let's dive into the topic. So here's the agenda. Why now? Third-party risk, my own particular AI and Gen AI journey, then reflecting on mirrors and risk, and this need for continuous monitoring, building holistic resilience, and then, like I said, a little bit about tabletop exercises and the one that I did for Cyber Alberta back in January. So let's think about why now. The problem statement here is that critical infrastructure is vulnerable. And what does it mean to be vulnerable? It means capable of being physically or emotionally wounded. It means you're open to attack. Exploits are actual attacks, right? And attacks and events and alerts. But vulnerability is just a potential. And that means that, obviously you can be vulnerable to criticism, but in the case of cyber, just like these baby sea turtles here, they've just hatched and they're headed out to the ocean. Computers have vulnerabilities, and cybersecurity, of course, is the term that refers to a defect in those systems that can be left open to attack. And so the vulnerability could refer to any type of weakness. It could be present in the computer itself, it could be in a set of procedures that are used for incident response, for example, or anything that allows information security to be exposed to a threat. Another problem definition, I like to refer to the Italian ice cream spumoni. And so current InfoSec solutions are often kind of piecemeal and glommed together like spumoni. And if you're familiar with it, it's an Italian dessert with maybe, pistachio, chocolate ice cream, vanilla, and it's just kind of smashed together, and then you take a slice of it. So when companies like Palo Alto Networks, for example, acquire another security company and solution, they often don't actually really integrate the software capabilities. And so we're left with software capabilities that are kind of glommed together like spumoni ice cream. And so I think it's fine for a dessert, but maybe not for a robust and fault-tolerant critical infrastructure. Another problem definition, I like to define the word resilience. As a philosopher, it's useful to not assume everyone is using the same definition. So for me, I think more about the social and emotional and educational definitions of resilience, where you're transformed and you adapt and you become better because of your resilience. And there's also a metallurgical kind of engineering definition where you're like hammering out the dent on a fender of a Volkswagen Beetle or something. You're just restoring it to a previous state. And I don't think cybersecurity should be like that. Why? Because when something did get attacked and breached, it was vulnerable. And so just backing up and restoring from that backup means you're restoring a vulnerable system, and it will be attacked again, and it may be breached a second time. That's what happened with CDK, I think it was called, the auto industry invoicing company that got hit with a breach. They started to recover, they brought their systems back online, and then they were breached again because they hadn't actually patched the systems yet. They were starting their incident response plan too soon, moving into the recovery phase. But there's a difference. There's like a spectrum that I've drawn it out here in terms of resilience and risk. And we think about resilience as maybe an element that's linked with these different layers of risk that range from tactical, maybe 10-minute event horizon, to strategic, which might be a 10-year event horizon. So if we think about data risk, you need to have good data classification, good data management. You need to have data discovery to figure out where it is on your systems. You need to have good policies and controls around data risk. Next up comes supply chain risk. And of course, it does no good to be online if your providers are not. And so when we think about supply chain and systemic dependencies, you need to know who your core providers are, because their disruptions can cause you to be offline, even if you weren't attacked, and even if your systems are working just fine, it can be an upstream problem. Then, of course, next comes third-party risk. And so we mitigate that with monitoring, hopefully 24/7 monitoring and modularity, having fungible third parties, being able to swap out one vendor for another in case it is offline, or to have fault tolerance and redundancy. Then insider risk. This is often referred to as insider threat as well. And that's a combination of accidental disclosure of information that happens with users, also the malicious threats and behaviors. And you may have heard about some of the companies in the tech sector that had inadvertently and unknowingly hired a North Korean threat actor to be a remote worker. And so there are imposters and identities that have been stolen, and people have laptops shipped. There was a woman, I think it was in Phoenix, Arizona, who had a laptop farm of 60 laptops. And they were all company issued, and they're all sent to what they thought was the address of the employee. And then it was somebody else doing it remotely from Asia Pacific. And some of those were actually North Korean threat actors that were working inside of major tech companies with those laptops. And so these are some of the things that are part of insider risk. Now, cognitive risk, I've done a couple of talks about this. In my mind, this is a failure of imagination, right? Too big to fail. Different types of historical biases that we have about what is secure and what is insecure. And so there's a lot of different cognitive risks that occur. And one of them, of course, is that, we're not going to be attacked. We're too small. But unfortunately, the threat actors don't really care whether you're big or small. They have ways of figuring out how much they should charge you for your ransom based on zip code or other types of assets that they can determine in the US and elsewhere. And so it's really a location-based service these days. How much you pay for ransom is geolocated, and they try to figure out your socioeconomic status and your income capabilities there. Then let's see, systemic risk. I'll talk about this a couple of times, but I just want to mention it here. These are emergent properties of complex systems. So Texas, for example, had this cold storm that came through one winter, and it took out almost the whole state, right? They were like 30 seconds away from a black start event, where they would have had a cascade failure of the entire grid because they had isolated themselves. They couldn't get, electricity from other states. And they had, a cascade failure. They were doing rolling blackouts in order to shed load and to preserve the capacity that was available. But unfortunately, some of the rolling blackouts took out electric compressors that were still feeding functional gas power plants. And so they lost even more capacity. And so that's what happens when we don't really understand the dependencies of these complex systems. We're no longer driving the car, right? It's a combination of mysticism and documentation and habit. And so I don't do this to make fun of Texas. I think a lot of states and a lot of cities have this kind of an event in their future. And it may not be Mother Nature. It might be a threat actor that shuts down water or electricity or telcos. And then, of course, regulatory risk. Regulatory oversight can actually disrupt your business, right? If you're being fined, right, or being investigated, or being found in violation. And there's a lot of changes that are coming to the laws and regulations. I like to joke that there's regulatory intelligence is emerging. So regulators didn't used to have to spend so much time understanding the infrastructure and the entities they regulate, whether that's energy or banking or others. But now they are, and they're starting to develop more insightful ways to understand risk in systems that they govern. The New York Department of Financial Services, for example, NYDFS, I live here in New York City. They're a bellwether regulator, and they've introduced some really advanced controls and requirements. One of them, for example, is MFA for everyone, multi-factor authentication, not just for privileged users. And that's the kind of thing that'll find its way into other environments in the next few years. Quantum risk is the one that I was talking about having fun with the World Economic Forum. This is the possibility of someone building a CRQC, a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, something that can break RSA encryption, for example, in 8 hours if it has sufficient number of qubits. Right now, I think maybe 1,000 to 2,000 or 3,000 qubits is the largest one that has been publicly admitted to have been built. You need around 20 million qubits in order to break RSA encryption for asymmetric encryption. So the quantum readiness toolkit that the World Economic Forum published that I contributed to is about what do we do now to prepare for the day when someone does build one of these computers and we won't really know it. It's not like a DDoS attack. There's no such thing as quantum incident response. You don't get to see, someone decrypting your data in a bunker in a data center offline with like a store now, decrypt later kind of BGP capture and hijack. BGP is a border gateway protocol that's used in networking. And a lot of times there's some scenic routing happening, as they call it. So somebody says, I have a route that'll help you get to your bank, faster. But unfortunately, that route sends all of your traffic to China, and then they save a copy of all the packets. And then they decrypt them later. That's the idea. Or Russia going through Iceland or Belarus or something. So sometimes they say, oh, it was just a fat finger, it was a typo. But other times we have to think that it was malicious and intent. Because they're hijacking traffic to the major search engine providers, to the banks, to Apple, Google, other companies like that. And then, of course, climate risk is now a part of a problem when we think about, sustainable development goals and national security, and the possibility of there being more hurricanes, more disasters, more tornadoes, more forest fires. And so there's all sorts of things that have to be accounted for that are kind of tipping the actuarial tables on frequency. These things used to happen at a certain cadence. Now they seem to be happening a lot more often. One of the other ones was just shipping, being able to get through the polar ice caps. So in that case, it's a good thing. You don't have to go through the Panama Canal, right? And so Canada, I think, has been upping its fleet lately, not the least of which would be for the recent change in administrative relationships with the government here in the U.S., which I apologize for. But having its own navy defending, the rite of passage through the Arctic Circle as the glaciers and icebergs melt away. So another question about why now is a quintessential startup and investor question or founder. Why is this solution? Oftentimes we'll agree it's a good solution, but the real interesting question is why wasn't it something that came up 5 years ago? Or why won't it be the right time to do this 5 years from now? It's also significant to note, I think when we talk about AI was not a DARPA research project. Defense Advanced Research Programs Agency for the Department of Defense in the US. It, unlike a lot of technology innovations like the internet and semiconductors and Ethernet and things like that, was not born of the government. It was born from the private sector. And so for this reason, it's actually following a very different trajectory, I think, which means that the government is playing catch up. Right? They didn't have this kind of AI technology the way that we're playing around with it these days in the last couple of years in some type of Cold War think tank or, previous kind of like research laboratory that then eventually made its way into commercial and public sector. There's also, of course, systemic risks besides quantum machine learning and national security risks, like I mentioned, and possibility of an AGI being generalized intelligence being coming into existence. And then, of course, the ubiquity, right? The rapid adoption of large language models, agentic AI. It's just, everything, everywhere, all at once, as they say. And so I think it's a couple of things to dive into. For national security, the FBI cyber division just published something that was a combination of CISA, the FBI, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Energy, urging critical infrastructure entities to review and improve their security. Why? Because they know threat actors have already infected a lot of critical infrastructure, and they're just waiting, sleeping, to be alerted and triggered for a particular cyber event or warfare, or perhaps China invading Taiwan kind of thing, and distracting us all from doing anything about it. There's very specific targets, of course, for OT and ICS, industrial control systems. One thing I want to mention here, the NRC Industrial Research Assistance Program, IRAP, has been a hallmark in Canada for about 70 years. And Ammolite has been delivering risk assessments to Canadian businesses and startups through the IRAP and CDAP programs for many years. And I just kicked off one such assessment earlier this week. But I have hyperlinks in the speaker notes for the deck that point to source links and documentation and details for these reports. So happy to share a copy of the presentation with anyone that wants it after the end. I have a QR code. It's a mail to tag. right? So it's not a landing page on a website or anything. And it just generates an email to me saying, please send me a copy of your deck. So that makes it easy for you to get a copy of it and to look at some of these links for these programs if you're not familiar with them. There's also, of course, the what the Critical Five that just published a report in June of last year. And this was a previous collaboration of 5 countries, 5 nations, talking about how to modernize their critical infrastructure and their approach to protecting it. And so that's an important element here because modern societies have a lot more digital vulnerabilities and a lot more complex dependencies of systems to keep our companies, our economy, our society, our way of life going, and our livelihoods. So this report's an update on evolving risks that you can check out if you haven't seen it already as well. And of course, systemic risk, I have a picture here of the blackout that happened in 2003 in the northeast of the US. And this was a cascade failure. And this was, again, systemic risk, emergent property of complex systems. And what happened, I think, was the proximate cause, if you haven't read about it, was a software bug in the alarm system in a control room at First Energy in Akron, Ohio, which would have rendered the operators aware of a problem and they would have isolated it. But because of the bug, they were unaware and they did not redistribute load. And it overloaded transmission lines, which ended up drooping into foliage and shorting out, catching fire, and causing this blackout. And so what should have been a manageable event turned into a local blackout that cascaded, into a regional blackout and the collapse of much of the northeastern regional electricity distribution system. So we'll talk about this some more. But I have a whole talk that I did on what I call Pound of Cure, which is a webinar from April that goes into this concept of systemic risk and systemic failure. And it has to do with numerosity, nonlinearity, the hyperconnectivity of these networks, and of course, adaptation and sensitivity to initial conditions, like a coral reef, for example, in an ocean ecosystem. And then, of course, ubiquity is playing a big part in the why now question for critical infrastructure, OT, and IT. And I guess I should throw it out now because I'll refer to it a few times. I believe that the biggest risk to OT is actually IT. Having IT administrators come in and say, you can't run Windows XP, you can't do that. It's the hubris of IT that is threatening OT the most. And when you think about the Colonial Pipeline, incident in the US, it was an IT system that got hacked and compromised, and they shut down the pipeline. But it wasn't actually the OT systems that were at risk. It was the nomination server, actually. And so they couldn't figure out how much to charge people. And so that's why they shut down the pipeline. It wasn't necessarily out of an abundance of caution. And it did cause loss of life and a big spike in prices. They could easily afford to pay the $5 to $10 million Bitcoin ransom in the surge in pricing that caused after that shutdown. So I think it was a little bit disingenuous of Colonial Pipeline to put it out there that they were doing this out of caution. Right? They were doing it because they knew they could make the money up, and because there was an exfiltration risk that someone was going to publish all the data that they had stolen, not just ransomed, the nomination server. Anyway, so there's thousands of insecure IoT devices out there. So if you haven't heard of Shodan.io, it is a tool that scans and makes it available to people what types of IP addresses and assets are out there. So I did a query just looking for IoT just yesterday, and it came back with over almost 10,000 addresses that have, and most of them are in China actually, but it directly exposed, Modbus and other ports that are used to control IoT and SCADA systems and industrial control systems. And so sites like Shodan can help you point out how much risk you have as a country or as a business if you look at your domain name, if you look at your IP address ranges. And if we drill down a little bit, we can see that there's some Canadian IP addresses that show up here when I look for, country equals CA, IoT is a search term, and port 20,002, which is a UDP port. In this particular case, I think, I have the next slide showing one particular IP address, and it's not necessarily that, TELUS in Calgary is vulnerable. This is actually just a smart power strip that's internet connected, but it's internet connected, meaning it has vulnerabilities. It's on port 80, probably has a default password. So someone installed a smart Wi-Fi plug. You can buy 2 packs of them for $20, right? And they likely use it to turn on and off their living room lights when they're not at home. So automated home enthusiasts can cause risk, right? Someone isn't going to be running CrowdStrike or other software on that little Linux embedded system in there to have a web server and other capabilities to turn on and off a power switch. And those can also be used and used for, breaching an infrastructure and staying resident, because again, there's nothing monitoring that device to make sure that it hasn't had some firmware installed by a threat actor that allows it to use it for remote access and other types of things like DDoS attacks, for example. So if I drill down a little further, I wanted to share with you, in case you hadn't heard about it, BeWired.nl. So this is a particular home automation enthusiast who's been doing this for years. When I lived in Amsterdam back in 2012, 2013, this website existed, and they had the camera for the front door. They had the number of times the toilet's been flushed, the temperature of the fridge, the solar panel usage. And so this is ultra hyper, I guess you could call it, home automation enthusiasts in Internet of Things. And of course, if we look at some of the things that are for Canadian, another thing about Ubiquiti, there's not a lot of usage of AI hardware and software, according to this survey of digital technology and internet use. 7% of Canadian businesses in 2023. But of those using it, about 3 out of 4 are using it for generative AI. And so there's going to be risks there that we're going to talk about, and how we can protect ourselves with continuous monitoring, holistic approach, and understanding some of the nature of the risks that AI has for us as builders and maintainers and defenders of infrastructure. One of the other things I want to mention real quickly, mechanistic interpretability. So a lot of these AI systems are black boxes. People don't understand how they work, even the people that made them. So there's a concept of reverse engineering what's going on in an AI system and trying to come up with predictable, right? Because a lot of times it can be unpredictable and it can even hallucinate. And so in this case, the goal behind mechanistic interpretability is a strong motivation for us to have AI safety and to understand how these AI systems arrive at decisions, particularly in safety critical contexts, whether that's shipping, maritime, water treatment, electric generation. And so everyone's on the bandwagon to digitize and bring technologies, capabilities to saving money and improving efficiency and return on investment. But there's a risk that comes with just putting an IP address on everything. And in this particular, we're talking about safety critical components. We have to make sure that human values are a part of the algorithms, essentially. And I put in a link here or a picture of iRobot, the Isaac Asimov book, and which was turned into a movie with Will Smith, if you might recall. But there's all sorts of things. Google has a secure AI framework, for example, and there's an overview of the literature in mechanistic interpretability and how we can figure out how to protect these critical systems, more and more of which are going to be semi-autonomous and autonomous. So next, I like to talk about third-party risk. And it doesn't make sense in my mind to talk about third-party risk without reminding ourselves what is first and second party. So first-party risk, I like to think there's a couple of dimensions to risk. I think of attestation, I think about awareness, I think about trust, and I think about the management of that risk. So in first party, you have self-attestation. You own the infrastructure, you run it, and you can attest to whether it's secure, whether you've patched it, whether it has the latest stable, secure versions of software, whether it's got a good network design, things like that. Your awareness has to do with pretty much you should have complete awareness, right? Because you built these systems. And then trust is exhibited through control. That's why people like on-prem data centers, for example. They have full control and they see all of the servers they have. They know where they are and how people may or may not be able to get to them. And then the domain of management, it's pretty much enterprise risk management for you and your first party assets. Now, second party, these are your customers. And so when you think about click-through terms on a website, booking a flight, airplane ticket, or buying a book, or even streaming a movie, there's going to be customer-based attestation. And there's going to be partial awareness of your infrastructure. Customers can see if you're generating a 404 error, or if the server is broken, right? Or if you're trying to, like Netflix, broadcast Mike Tyson's fight, and you had 250 million people try to watch it at the same time, and there was no audio, no video, and a lot of people got to see nothing. But at least they didn't charge you for it, right? It was free. So that was an experiment that Netflix made in production. But oftentimes, trust and familiarity is exhibited through loyalty, right? And like Better Business Bureau and Yelp and things like that. And then contractual risk management. Those are the terms and conditions that are clicked through when you visit a site and you get services or other types of capabilities through it. Third-party risk now, you have external attestation. You have incomplete awareness of what's going on. These are the service providers that you're using to help implement, like a payment gateway provider. If you don't accept credit cards, you have a third party do that for you. Trust is exercised and expressed through impartiality. By this, I mean, if you want to do a pen test, it's useful to have someone that doesn't know anything about your infrastructure, because they're impartial. They're going to question, and test everything. They're not going to sort of naturally gravitate away from the fragile systems if you asked your internal team to do the testing, right? They might not want to knock Humpty Dumpty off the wall and have to pick up all the pieces when they accidentally break. And we know that ICS and SCADA systems and System 7 PLCs, if you scan these things with an Nmap scanner, they can fall over just because they don't know what to do with protocol packets and data that was never intended to be sent their way, and they never expected to have to reject it or deny it. And so they often, like I said, they fall over. I built mission critical infrastructure that controlled power plants when I was in Holland for Nuon and Vattenfall and RWE. And it was just insane how much it is baling wire and duct tape that holds together critical infrastructure. And some of these protocols are like from the 1940s, written by Russians, right, in the radio telemetry sciences and things like that, for firing up and controlling power plants. And of course, vendor risk management, third-party risk management. That's the sweet spot of what I did when I was at Security Scorecard, the security ratings company, scanning and mapping all of IPv4 every week and seeing how many vulnerabilities there are. When I joined Security Scorecard in 2020, there were about 20 million vulnerabilities, 30 million. I'm sorry, not million, billion, 20 to 30 billion vulnerabilities visible when you nmap the routable IP space of IPv4. Just a few weeks ago, if you check, it'd probably be 230 billion or 200, so it's orders of magnitude worse. It's the exact same number of IP addresses as it was back in 2020. And so it's just getting orders of magnitude more complicated, more misconfigurations, more CVEs being discovered and published, despite the fact that the whole process almost went offline due to budget cuts recently with CISA. And then, of course, all third parties have vendors as well. And that's your fourth party, or what we would call nth party risk. In this case, it's peer attestation. You have very minimal awareness. Trust is essentially exercised to be a proxy. You're trusting the fourth party because your third party chose them. And you may not even know that that was your third party. When Kaseya was distributing its remote management monitoring software and ransomware, because the threat actors had taken over Kaseya's distribution of binaries, a lot of people didn't know they were customers of Kaseya, right? Because their MSP, or the managed service provider, was using Kaseya. And so they had no idea why their systems were getting hit with ransomware and why it was the remote monitoring and management software that was actually distributing the ransomware. If we think about some of the elements for fourth party, of course, ecosystem risk management. And the reason I show this picture here, if you don't know it, it's the Ever Given. It's large sized ways, right? It's a 20,000 TEU, super container ship. And they got stuck in the Suez Canal in March of 2021 for 6 days. And it disrupted the entire global supply chain. So supply chains are not 3 links long. It's not just you and one uplink and suppliers, and you and one downlink, your consumers. It's a whole ecosystem of risk. And so we have to think about, how complex these systems have become, where IKEA couldn't get any furniture through the Suez Canal to Europe, right, or vice versa, back both directions, due to just one event, one ship, and it wasn't even a cyber attack, right? It was just a pilot error. Now, I know Calgary has no navigable waters. Canada has the longest coastline of any country in the world, and it does have a lot to protect. But I do mention maritime just because of the sort of cascade effects that shipping has. I'm here in New York City, and so I work with the Sector New York Area Maritime Security Committee with Coast Guard as a volunteer to help them learn cyber. But one of the things I wanted to use this for in this talk was just to point out some of the differences between the nature of OT threats and the nature of IT threats. And so if you think about the mythical maritime, right? I have a picture on this slide of Argonath, right? Which is the Pillar of Kings, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan. A great monument in Gondor. And each of the two figures have a crown and a helm and an axe, and they're holding out their right hand, or no, their left hand is raised in a gesture of warning to Gondor's enemies. And unfortunately, in cyberspace, there are no natural features to be utilized in this way, right? Cyberspace has no natural contours because the theater of operations is entirely manufactured, right? It's man-made. It's networked equipment, hardware and software. So for the port of the future, OT risk management has to do now more with the additive risk of IT infrastructure being there. When the port of Houston was attacked, it was attacked through a manage engine's self-service software password reset function, and the Chinese had broken into there. I know the previous CISO for the Port of Houston, and he presented at the Port of the Future conference in Houston a couple of years ago when I was presenting there as well. And it was great to hear his stories. He's allowed to tell the stories because they detected it and injected the threat actors before anything terrible happened. But it was one of those few cases where it was actually a win rather than just a horrible loss, like the Port of Nagoya with their ransomware breach, for example. But anyway, so let's examine some of the dimensions. But one of the things I just wanted to mention with the differences, I'll get to that in a minute in terms of devices and protocols. But certainly one of the best documents that I like to evangelize is SANS, and they have 5 essential OT controls. Why? Because we should not be measuring OT with IT frameworks and IT standards, because it's completely incorrect. And so Rob Lee, the founder and CEO of Dragos.com, he worked on this. There's a white paper, there's a webcast recording, you can get at it for free. But the 5 essential OT controls are industrial control systems, incident response, defensible architecture, aka segmentation, ICS network visibility and monitoring. A lot of people have no capacity to monitor their networks. Secure remote access, so vendors can phone home. Assets can say, okay, I need to have a new hard drive, or this particular component is failing, send out a technician to fix it. And then risk-based vulnerability management. So I'll just give a sentence on each one of these for a minute. So for ICS, and for your incident response, you have to have a specific industrial control system incident response plan. And it has to account for some of the complexities and necessities. Why? Because in OT, availability is actually a lot higher than in the pillars of InfoSec, right? You have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. A lot of IT people don't care if their website goes down unplanned and they break their 99.9% uptime SLA. There might be a small fine, but they're used to things going offline. But mission critical infrastructure has like hardware with 30-year life cycles, right? Cranes, generators, and distributed networking, transformers and switches and gear like that. It's not the kind of thing that you're amortizing every 3 years like a laptop and writing off the capex on it, right? So that's an important distinction, right? And of course, I imagine Alberta IoT, you all have ICS specific response plans, but maybe not. Maybe some of them need to, read this particular white paper and take some of the lessons learned from Dragos's incident response that they've done for a lot of takeover breaches of Oldsmar water treatment plant and facilities in Florida, for example, most people heard about. But there were other attacks that week that no one heard about that didn't make the news. Defensible architecture reduce as much as possible the attack surface through system design, implementation, for the good efforts and segmentation of network by the defenders of those networks. And so this is an important part of the business, working through making sure that you don't have assets on the internet like these, switch plugs and other types of assets that Shodan can see or that security scorecard can see when it scans. Then network visibility, the one sentence I want to surface here, sometimes the connectivity is not needed. And it's just a convenience. Someone thinks, oh, it's kind of cool. It's got a web server in it. Let's put it up on the internet. No, please don't. That can be hacked. It will be owned. It will be hacked within minutes usually. Certainly if it's got vulnerable uh, packages of Linux embedded in the SSH connection, even if it doesn't do SSH, or if it does, there's still ways of compromising these assets if they're not patched, and oftentimes they're not. I'll get to one of the metrics on patching of OT in a minute. Secure remote access. As we get more and more digital efficiencies in manufacturing and healthcare systems, like magnetic resonance imaging, MRIs, they have software in them. They have embedded Linux, right? They have operating systems. They have Windows. And a lot of times in the healthcare sector, you can't upgrade the OS because it goes out of support. The OEM equipment, has been certified to run on a certain version of Windows, and they may not get around to getting it to run on Windows Server 2022 or 2016. It may still be running on Windows XP. It may still be running on Windows Server 2000 or 2008. This is unfortunate because you don't actually have an upgrade path, right, without violating your support contracts. And then, of course, risk-based vulnerabilities. This circles back to number one. We need to focus on risk-based. And I asked myself once, when I kept hearing this phrase, and I was wondering, what's the opposite of risk-based? Because everything should be risk-based, right? Would you address something if there wasn't a risk? And then I thought, oh, I know, hype-based management programs, right? Where you read something in a magazine and it's got FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So you can have hype-based vulnerability management programs, which are not a good expense and allocation prioritization of resources. So anyway, these are the actual risks to the org, not what IT people worry about. When I was at ASCAP, we had a disaster recovery, business impact analysis, and we're looking for the recovery point time and the recovery point objective, and recovery point objective, and figuring out how often we have to do snapshots and what's the high availability of these systems. And the IT people said, oh, well, we need to have 1 hour snapshots and 24 to 48 hour recovery time. And then when we asked the business, they said, oh, we could do without these systems for 30 days. I'm like, what? 30 days? And I was like, yeah, if we have to cut a check to an ASCAP member, we'll just cut the same check we did last month. And then after 30 days, the systems are back online, and we'll just do a delta, because it'll just be a few dollars, one or the other, take a little more off or pay a little more out. And so it was mind-blowing to realize that the business had a 30-day recovery time objective, which allowed us to back off a whole bunch of expenditures on fault tolerance and replication of data out of region and all sorts of scenarios. So don't be afraid to be surprised, and ask the question in a very specific way, and don't ask the IT people, or better yet, ask the IT people, but also ask the business. All right, so one of the things that's happening right now is that we're expanding the threat landscape. We're having a convergence of IT and OT, and we're bringing it together. I like to call it the protect surface instead of the attack surface, right? Because we're defenders, and it's less of a wartime metaphor. So the proliferation of IoT devices has obviously increased a lot of third-party services, a lot of packages and software in them that are not updated. You could have a Nest, thermostat in your house. You can have a fish tank thermometer that's connected to the internet. There's a famous example of a casino in Vegas that had the High Rollers database exfiltrated through the fish tank thermometer. Why? Because it was on the same set network segment. So make sure your IoT stuff is on a separate network from your cameras and from your servers and your HVAC, if you think about what happened with Target's breach of their point of sale system. So I'll talk about scenario stadiums, since I was the CISO at Major League Soccer. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in those microcosms of third-party risk in every soccer and football stadium, and baseball stadiums as well, of course. And then a little bit about maritime, not because it's relevant, but because the same kinds of elements are present for everyone that has IoT. So Brian Contos gave a session in 2023 at the B-Sides here in New York. And I've got a link to the YouTube video in the slides notes. He gave me some of the numbers that I'm putting up here. So what do the numbers look like? On planet Earth, there are roughly 10 million interesting servers and about 5 billion interesting laptops. If you hacked all of them, it'd be done. You'd have hacked everything. What's interesting here, of course, we saw something like 230 billion vulnerabilities across these misconfigurations, unupdated software packages, exposed assets that shouldn't be on the internet. And that's a lot of risk, right? But now if we look at OT, there's about 50 billion devices and growing every minute. And of course, what we know about OT is that 50% of them have default passwords and 74% have end-of-life firmware that are never going to get software updates, aka they're all vulnerable. And so what happens is someone's patient zero might be an IT laptop, right? An IT asset. But they know they're going to get detected and ejected, right, by CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or other types of endpoint tools. So they pivot quickly. They pivot to the OT network, and that's where they stay resident. That's where they install remote access capabilities. That's where they go from the SQL server on the Microsoft database into your cameras, into your ICS systems, and they update and take over the firmware, and they have all the access they want. They have web shells, remote proxies, and gateways to get at this stuff. So I think it's interesting to just sort of see the orders of magnitude difference between them. And then the other thing about IT and OT, IT has a couple of protocols, right? TCP, UDP, and that's it, right? And you have billions of devices, right? Laptops and servers, and they have all these different states, right? They can be in multiple states of combination of read, write, read only. But on the OT side, what you end up having is lots of protocols and only a couple of states, right? You can be open as a switch, right, for a valve or for a circuit. You can be closed. And then it can be in read-only mode or read-write. And a lot of times the breaches happen because the systems are left in read-write mode instead of read-only. Why? It's, I guess, a habit in many cases. It's a pain, right, for people to change it. Or they've been tweaking the OEM hardware and writing their own firmware for these assets. And that's why they can't upgrade them and patch them. Like I said, System 7 PLCs from Siemens and other vendors, sometimes the passwords are hard-coded and etched into the silicon. You can't actually change the password. And it might be a 4-digit character, password, which is unfortunate, but something we have to accommodate and deal with. All right, so let's move on to the OT stuff. This is kind of fun. I found this really cool diagram that showed all the different systems and networks, that are part of the infrastructure. You've got fire safety systems, fan mobile devices. You've got bench Wi-Fi for the teams. You've got referees and their tablets and their network. You've got ball tracking technology using LPS, which is local positioning systems, and GNSS, global navigation satellite systems, and of course GPS, global positioning systems. And there's a connected ball that's going to be used in the World Cup in 2026. So I was thinking if people wanted to influence the outcome, they could create a handball event by hacking the sensors and, sending a false signal saying the gyrometer or accelerometer on this ball had shifted. It wouldn't be that hard to fuzz these systems, I think, and or create an offsides event when there wasn't one. And so there's going to be drones flying around. There's CCTV, cameras. There's, the PA system can be hacked. The lighting control system could have malware. The concessions point of sale, very often a source of breaches and outages. Ticketing kiosks, turnstiles and gates are electronically connected as well. And of course, the HVAC, our boogeyman from the days of Target. And of course, all these devices have other assets that are connected to them. This is just one vendor, Catapult. I took this page, these images off of their site. Every player has this thing on them, right? This vest that's doing heart rate and positioning, and they're quantifying all the plays, looking at the ball, Bluetooth, for other types of devices that are potentially being used to keep track of all of the different data. I think there was something like 3 million data points per match coming off of a soccer game now, and all of that's being used. The video signal is being used to do volumetric mesh, inference to figure out if someone's limping after a tackle, to see if they're injured. It's not just XYZ coordinates anymore for tracking players in games. And then, of course, vessels. This was from Carnival at the Maritime Transportation Security ISAC summit that I spoke at a couple of years ago in Florida. And effective July of this year in the US, Title 33 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 105, has been updated, which has required cybersecurity requirements that you have to have a cybersecurity plan, not just a facility security plan. You have to designate a CISO. I don't know why Coast Guard didn't use CISO because that's what we all use in the IT world. But anyway, cyber is CYSO. You have to have strong passwords, MFA. You have to do tabletop exercises, pen testing. You have to do red team exercises. And there's over 3,000 MTSA regulated facilities that are going to have to do this. And in this image, you see all of the systems on a ship. And so there's a lot of similar kind of systems that are used in the cranes and in the port facilities as well. And now New York, Port Authority, New York, New Jersey, we have a CISO and we have budget and we have a big remit. We have all the airports and all the bridges, tunnels, and ports to pay attention to. So they've got a pretty good security program, but a lot of these smaller operations are going to struggle to do all of this. And so there's a big need, I think, for OT cybersecurity service offerings. And then lastly, I reference what happened in Baltimore. This is the Dali, right, that took out the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Can you imagine if that had been a cyber attack and not just lack of maintenance? It'd be a very different world, I think, that we'd be living in right now. And I like to point out that the bridge didn't collapse. The verb that they used in the headlines was wrong, right? This bridge was destroyed. It was hit by the Empire State Building lying on its side with 200 million newtons of force. It was technically not even a collision. It was actually an elision. In maritime law, an elision is when a moving vessel hits a stationary object. So it wasn't actually a collision. So I like to point that out as a wordsmith, pedantic type person. But you can imagine, obviously, cyber attacks. At DEF CON, they have the Maritime Hacking Village. They start fuzzing the systems. They fill the ballast on one side of the ship. They can sink it. They can steer it. They can do whatever they want. They can fuzz, fake the AIS. They can fake GPS and spoof GPS as well. And so you can cause an international event by saying, oh my God, there's a US warship in Russian waters, or vice versa. So anyway, they released the NTSB released the preliminary report in May. There was no reason to think that it was a cyber attack. The ship had lost power like 3 times while it was at the dock, right? So it lost it on its way out. Should have had a tug with it. Could have kept this from happening. But anyway, it's useful to think about the voyage data recorder. This is the black box that was on that ship. This particular model on the Dali was built in 2015, contained this particular 6 hours of data, 34 days of internal data on a hard drive, a floating capsule, in case the ship sinks, you can get the floating capsule and get the data off of it. Anyway, there's all sorts of things that have network connectivity on ships now that didn't used to. Same thing with manufacturing plants. Same thing with the operating room in a hospital. I think the average number of devices, connected devices, like 23 to 25 devices now, and they all speak different protocols and they all have different ways of communicating. Not all of which are encrypted or secure. Let's see, 355. So it is now a little bit to mention the U.S. advanced manufacturing. I wrote a chapter for this book that came out in June. I think it was actually August of last year. And you can go ahead and download it and check it out. It's a fun chapter. I think if we're looking at the fabric of Industry 4.0 and knowledge workers and the connected infrastructure, it's an unprecedented velocity of change. Cybersecurity resilience has to be there. It's a part of national security at this point. It's not just a nice to have. And so the chapter I wrote was was chapter 3. I co-wrote it with Jim Davis from UCLA. And it's called Cybersecurity Resilience for Advanced Manufacturing. And so we talk about the idea of digital twins. We talk about metadata, because all data needs to be sort of classified, and you need metadata for your data, where it's coming from, how often it should be read, and talk about smart manufacturing as well. Printing, stem cells for cardiovascular systems and things like that. Bioacoustic engineering is a fun research area I've been looking into recently as my daughter's getting ready for college. I wanted her to do something in neuroscience, and that was certainly a fascinating new area of development. And then I'm not sure if this makes people in Alberta jealous because it's a different province, but Canada had this thing that I found called the Scale AI Supercluster, and they did a digital twin. They spent $25 million to invest in. And what I thought was interesting when I read the actual press release, it said they're doing through air dry tissue machine, which is supported by AI ready systems and AI ready infrastructure, which makes it sound like it's a bit premature, which means they probably went live with no AI at all. Right? It was just AI ready and AI, potential. But anyway, this was a link that I found that was talking about how cool it is to have digital twins, and you can have real-time data, and you can test on things in a digital twin without messing with production, right? Without bringing the actual systems offline. So this was something that was their, Sherbrooke tissue plant. I think they spent about 575 million on the plant. So what's another 25 million to bring it to around 600 million, right, to launch, and then get a nice press release and have all these partners in the Canadian government take credit for being advanced and having all that stuff. So I'm not sure how much of that is hype and how much of that is real now. You'd have to tell me maybe. The next thing I wanted to touch on, just because I think it's useful. This is some of the fresh content I put into the deck today. Alberta Children's Hospital. So organized crime and nation-state threat actors were previously not so inclined to attack schools and hospitals. It's no longer the case anymore, unfortunately. So this is one of the largest, I believe, in Alberta. And this is what their security score looks like. If you look at security scorecard, which I did today and captured, where they're below average in terms of DNS health and application security. And security ratings, I think they provide really good insights into internet-facing assets, the kind of thing that might be discovered by a threat actor during the reconnaissance phase. What do you have? What is it running? Is it patched? Should it even be accessible to the internet? So they have, if I remember correctly, this next slide shows that the history for the last 12 months for the Children's Hospital shows that they're at a low C. And the blue line is the sort of healthcare industry standard, which is a B. Now, having an A doesn't mean you won't be hacked. And it doesn't mean you won't be breached. It just means it's that much harder for them to do it. They might go after someone else. So the ability of an organization to maintain a good security posture is great, but you need to avoid misconfigurations, lapses in software patching, unintentionally exposed services. But this is not the only attack vector, right? You and your assets. So I took a look at the DNS text record for Alberta Children's Hospital.ab.ca. And attackers will go after your service providers if your security is good, right? They go after the weakest link. So what did I find? They'll disrupt one of your mail service providers. So convio.net is convio.com. Convio.com was breached in May of 2020. Why? Because they were acquired by Blackbaud in 2012. And so all of the records and all the data that had been breached and had been used, for donations and other types of tracking of PII was likely a part of that breach. And so the third party was Blackbaud, like I said. The reason I know about it is that my son's data was also part of that breach because he was learning to dance ballet at American Ballet Theater here in New York, who was also using Blackbaud at the time. So the reason I make a small digression here, I'm not selling security scorecard, I'm just mentioning it. There's other companies like BitSight that do the same kind of thing. I worked with them actually on a taxonomy of continuous monitoring for a couple of years and partnered with Risk Recon and Panarrays and others. But really, it is interesting to see, though, that there was a 2020 announcement that the Cyber Center, right, the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, is actually doing a partnership with Scorecard to manage critical infrastructure and use these scanning and type of reporting data across critical infrastructure in Canada to be able to have that finger on the pulse of, oh, they're vulnerable today, rather than just sending out, like I said, questionnaires once a year, asking people, do you patch, do you have MFA, do you have backups, things like that. So my own Gen AI journey. So this is a comic that some friends of mine gifted of me. And so I have a handle. I am Professor Eclecticus. This is something I picked up when I was at Marvel. I thought, what would be my superpower? And what would be my name? And what would I look like? And so it was really kind of fun. It was almost like doing a resume, but it was a 3-page comic. And you had to tell the story in like just 10, speech bubbles. So it's really concise. It's not like a 1-page resume. It's even less information. How did you get involved in technology? How did you get involved in cybersecurity? What are your interests? What is your superpower? My superpower is analogies and metaphors. As a philosopher, I'm really good at coming up with ways of explaining things so that people don't have to learn anything. They just have to say, oh, it's like this other thing I already understand. So this year I got to be a part of an AWS cybersecurity startup accelerator. And we had 36 cybersecurity AI ML startups with partnership from CrowdStrike and NVIDIA to refine their go-to-market strategies and vision. And Then I was also teaching at NYU, and we have a generative teaching with generative tools working group. So we meet monthly and talk for the last 2 years about sharing links. How do we embrace this technology and not be like a 1960s mathematics teacher who laments the introduction of the handheld calculator, right? It's like, oh no, people won't be able to, do long math on paper anymore. It's like, I never needed to do it even before the calculator, I'm sure, or after. But obviously there's different skills that AI will allow us to focus on and to sort of delegate repetitive, error-prone tasks to agentic AI and other types of automations. And then, of course, a personal rabbit hole of lurking on Mid-Journey Discord servers just to see what kind of images people were asking it to make. Fascinating. And of course, making lyrics and videos. I have something to share with you in a minute where I did that for my presentation for Secure World. But anyway, so there's some links in here about this particular I think 10 of them went to RSA and did a yeah, here's the logos. 10 of these companies went to RSA and then had like a Shark Tank session. And then one of them won. I think it was 2 of the companies that I was mentoring made it into the top 10. So I think I did a pretty good job advising them. And one of the other things I would advertise real quick is Wall Arm. I did a video webinar with someone from Intuit, and Intuit is using AI to help you do your taxes, at least in America. And Tim Erlin is the VP of product there. So we talked about how do you protect agentic AI? And it's basically securing APIs, right? Because it's an API-driven world. And agentic AI, except when you're typing things into ChatGPT in a web browser, all of your other AI stuff is going to be happening over APIs. So I think 98.9% of all AI vulnerabilities are actually API related. 74.4% are directly API related, and 21.5% are indirectly related. So for perfect example here, weak API authentication mechanisms, inadequate rate limiting, which allows people to harvest, steal data, broken access controls. These are the basic OWASP top 10 for APIs. A lot of them apply to AI as well. And so you can read or check out that video and that conversation that we had about how to protect agentic. One of the other ones is a webinar that I did for the Better Business Bureau of Canada in April, which was last month. And it was on the power and promise of AI. And so here I just did a screenshot of one of the job displacement things for actors in Tennessee, I think. Yeah, they have the Elvis Act, which is ensuring likeness, voice, and image security, right? Because all of this stuff that comes out of machine learning and ChatGPT, if you think about it, it's copyright infringement as a service. Right? It's there harvesting all of the images, all of the art, all of the music, and it's creating things with no attribution, right? With no software licensing respect for GitHub code and Copilot and tools like that. So there will be some legal precedent cases and setting of precedent when these things come to trial. Like, what was it, Getty Images or Shutterstock, going after Stable Diffusion, because you could actually see this Shutterstock logo in some of their images, right? It got a little munged, but in general. So here's my fun piece that I want to share with you, though. I wanted to have walk-up music for my keynote, doing this mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most vulnerable vol talk at Boston's Secure World event. And I didn't want to have copyright infringement by using like Eminem, Lose Yourself, right? With this pump up music everyone has. And so here it is. I took the deck, threw it into ChatGPT, tweaked the lyrics to improve them a bit, put them into Suno.ai, and said, give me a jazz hip hop track to go with it. So here it is for your enjoyment. I won't play the whole 3 minutes, but here goes.
Yo, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the weakest link of all? Is it the system, the vendor's flaw, or the IoT chilling in the hall? The stadium's lit, but the risks are higher. Legacy tech mixed with wires on fire. Third-party hooks, they're the silent spies. No alerts, then the threat just multiplies.
Gotta keep it moving, can't let it slide. Continuous monitoring, eyes open wide.
Packets flow like.
So anyway, it was great fun. I love the quality of this track that it came up with. And just for those that want to hear the whole thing, when I gave this chat or this talk, I think I can do something for everyone here, right? Or maybe you have to, yeah, here's everyone. Let me put the link to the SoundCloud MP3 so you can hear the whole track. They wanted to use it for their spinning class. They thought it was great because they're like a cybersecurity person that does governance, risk, and compliance. And they loved the lyrics and they thought it was great fun. I enjoyed it. You know, you have to play with this stuff. That's how you have fun with technology. But anyway, so that was one thing that I had posted. You now have a link to that SoundCloud recording. If you want the full-on MP3, you just email me and I'll be happy to send it to you. Because there is no copyright, right? I'm the creator of it, but it was a transformational thing. And of course, there was some, you know, great lyrics and trumpet lick in there, and trumpet players like, wow, that's a pretty good AI trumpet player. But anyway, so that's one of the things I did. And then part of my talk for Secure World on the next couple of slides, because I like this idea of a mirror. And I referred to Snow White, magic mirror on the wall, who's, you know, the most beautiful of all in the movie, right? But there's all sorts of mirrors. And so not to get cheeky, you know, there's one-way mirrors, two-way mirrors, magical mirrors, smart mirrors, infinity mirrors, you know. And I think about the cyber translation of each one of these types of mirrors. So for example, when I'm doing security ratings, I'm holding up a mirror to you and your attack surface, and you look at it, and if you don't like what you see, you might want it to appear taller than you are, right? Which means you want me to like give you an A when you have a B, right? And I don't do that. We don't do that, right? It has to be objective. You have to trust that the mirror is not distorting what you're seeing. There's heated mirrors, acoustic mirrors, you know, tiled pocket mirrors, rear view mirrors. But the earliest known mirror was a polished stone, like obsidian. It was found in Turkey from at least 8,000 years ago. And I think, like I said, each of these mirrors has a different function, and the resulting views and visions are determined by their type. And in the case of the fairy tale, we have the evil queen of Snow White and the seven dwarfs. But you also had the enchanted handheld mirror in Beauty and the Beast, which was allowing you to sort of have an all-knowing entity that could find out where, you know, Belle's father was when he was out searching for her. And of course, this concept of the looking glass and data science equivalents, you know, for going through the mirror, you know, with Alice in Wonderland. And of course, we hope, of course, that risk exposure, you know, should be a true mirror. One of the things I could and did dive into was the vanity mirror. So what's the cybersecurity equivalent of the vanity mirror? I would say it would be a self-serving evaluation of a surface deep assessment where you just check the box. You say, okay, I did this audit. I have all these things. I have a firewall. Doesn't matter if the firewall has an any rule on it though, right? Which makes it into a switch or a hub, right? So just having the firewall isn't check the box, right? Security and compliance are not the same thing. You may have heard this before. And then the Rouge test was interesting. Psychologists use it to test self-awareness. So what's the cyber equivalent of the Rouge test? Where a small mark is placed on the baby's face, but it reaches out to the mirror and thinks it's going to touch, you know, the rouge, you know, the red mark on their forehead in the mirror instead. So they haven't individuated. They can't tell the difference between themselves and an image of themselves. So I think superficial risk metrics, like dashboards that are always green, that show everything's hunky-dory, right? That is a, you know, vanity mirror equivalent, or an overemphasis on low risk issues, right? Sometimes, you know, you're addressing minor and cosmetic stuff because it's easy to fix, and you don't go after the like legacy, you know, database that hasn't been updated in 5 years or something. There's a policy over practice bias, where you have documented policies that are rarely enforced, right? There's also this concept of compliance theater, meeting the letter, like I said, of having a firewall, but it actually doesn't actually stop any bad things from happening. So I think effective cybersecurity requires looking in the mirror to identify and address deeper vulnerabilities and risks. This is a pretty cool image of my kids in Bali at a temple, the highest point on the island. I think it's the Lumpuyang Temple, and my wife and kids got to visit there last fall. It's one of 9 of the holiest places on the very holy island of Bali. And when I think about reflecting mirrors, I think what's interesting here is you have this idea of a travel mirror, right? As opposed to like a full length mirror that would be the one you have at home. And so this might be a SIG light assessment, if you know the shared information gathering format for SIG. And of course, we're looking in the mirror, we are both the observer and the observed. And in cybersecurity, third-party risk is not just about assessing others. It's actually understanding how their risk becomes ours. So I had a lot of fun as a philosopher playing around with this metaphor of analogies of mirrors. And I think a company's ability to manage their vendor risk is a direct reflection of their own security maturity, demanding introspection, alignment, and continuous improvement. I took it even one level further, and I brought up Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, and I put up an image and I ran it through a forensic analysis tool. And the forensic imaging tool detected clones of clusters of pixels, right? So everything has a story, right? Everything has a history. And so here I was waxing philosophic again, talking about perception, identity, and truth. So perception in risk assessment is not just revealing threats, it also has this lens of regulatory discourse. Are the regulators concerned about the vulnerabilities? Are there technological biases? Are there institutional priorities or depriorities, for different types of risk? And then, of course, identity. The digital self is not an intrinsic essence, but it's a composite, actually, of access controls, authentication protocols, actually beliefs, intent of a user, of an administrator, decisions and surveillance and mechanisms. These all define who is trusted and who is suspect, right? Who is an anomalous, right? When the threat actor has taken over an account. And then, of course, truth. What is measured becomes truth, and what escapes quantification remains largely invisible. So I had a lot of fun, like I said, waxing philosophic on this and talking about how cybersecurity, in the mirror reflects not an objective truth, but a constructed reality. The risk is not merely identified, but it's also shaped by the frameworks of power and culture that define what is visible and what is hidden and what is deemed a threat. All right, so let's figure out how to make things better. What do we need for continuous monitoring? We need near real-time visibility. Can't just send out a questionnaire once a year. And you need to have third-party integration for third-party risk of their visibility, of their risks and disruptions. And then you have the new tools and techniques, modern tools like SIEMs and SOARs and IoT-specific monitoring. One of the things I like to point out, I think that's actually on the next slide. If your antivirus scans your system every 30 minutes, but a modern threat actor can pivot and move laterally, according to like CrowdStrike's report, within 18 minutes, then you're not going to be able to mitigate that, right? Patient zero infection, they win every time. So your frequency of checking has to be more frequent. So for the real-time visibility part, you have, you can't do these periodic assessments. You have to what I call event-based assessments. Your score dropped, right? There was a breach event. I know about it the next day. It gets reported to me by my monitoring tools. Build a portfolio of 15,000 vendors at Intel, for example. How many vendors does Nike have to watch on? How many vendors does NASA have to monitor? All of these could cause disruptions to their programs. So auditors, were once satisfied, right, with these annual assessments. It's almost like the meter reader coming out and checking your meter once or twice a year to see how much electricity you're using. Now we have smart meters that are reporting 5-minute time series data, right? But what I love to point out, of course, your mileage may vary with the word and definition of real time. When I worked at the World Economic Forum, I put the word continuous in front of monitoring as a best practice. And it took 2 years to get that into their guidance. And then, of course, there's still room for interpretation as to what real time means. If you ask, the Air Force, you do real-time auditing of your Air Force bases. Like, yeah, we do an audit every 3 years. That to them is the definition of real time or continuous. So anyway, other times, of course, we're talking about 5-minute data feeds of significant sensor data and things like that. So like I said, monitor the security posture of your vendors continuously. That's what tools are useful for, because you're going to outsource that. You're not going to nmap all of IPv4 yourself. You can use BitSight or Security Scorecard or other companies to help you do that. Third-party integration, supply chain opacity. This is a problem. We need protocols to know when your upstream provider or your fourth party or nth party provider is running out of widgets. That widgets could stop you from delivering your stuff. Tariffs can also stop you from delivering your stuff, unfortunately, but I won't get into tariffs right now or politics. There needs to be a transparency for downstream visibility. SBOM is good for software. HBOM, hardware bill of materials, is also good for hardware. It helps us at least know what components are in the stuff. It's like food labels. But as soon as food labels showed up on a package of potato chips, people didn't automatically start eating more healthily. right? It made it possible for you to say, oh, okay, there's a lot of cholesterol, there's a lot of salt in here. This red dye number 3 or whatever, right? What is the cyber equivalent of red dye number 3? I would say log4j, right? If you know the vulnerabilities that ran up around that package. But anyway, systemic risk, I've mentioned it before. Cascade failures like we saw in Texas, complex systems, is not due to the number of nodes, it's the interconnectedness and the nonlinear nature of these. And again, there's a talk that I did that you can check out if you want to dive into that one. Encrypted private keys, right? That's sensitivity to initial conditions. If your VM or your system stands up, you know how oftentimes when you want to like create a password, it asks you to like jiggle the mouse or type some random keys on the keyboard. You're generating entropy, you're generating randomness, except it's not really that random, right? You can use quantum technology and come up with a pure random number. If you ask Alexa, tell me a number between 1 and 10, and it says 7. And then in a minute later, you say, tell me a number between 1 and 10. And it goes 7, right? You start to get suspect, right? That there's not a really good source of entropy and randomness for this tool, this voice assistant to use. The same kind of thing happens with computers and VMs. They're like born like Frosty the Snowman. They're like, happy birthday. They just had this lobotomy. And they're like, pick a random number between 1 and 10 and use it as a salt for your encryption algorithm. I'm going to pick 7. And so it's always going to be this kind of thing where you can actually have cyber crypto vulnerabilities because we don't think about these initial systems and how it all cascades from those little simple moments, with a VM being launched. Tools and techniques, seam stores and copilots. That was like the Web 1.0 era, right? And it wasn't hard to monitor the assets because there weren't very many of them. Now, of course, there are billions of companies and billions of vulnerabilities, and now we have to have these ephemeral assets, auto-scaling components in the cloud, clusters and nodes of VMs and containers, and they wink into and out of existence at a very high velocity, and there might not even be an audit trail. Was it breached? Who breached it? What was the vulnerability? So I think there's also going to be a period of vendor consolidation coming up, where there's going to be big fish eating little fish, and adjacent capabilities are going to be merged and hopefully simplified. And this particular graph here is industrial cyber vendor landscape in 2024. And some of the vendor logos you can see show up under more than one category, right? Like, I don't know, Cisco, or, HP. But basically, there's a nice link here. I can share it in the chat as well in case you don't want to ask for the copy link address. Copy of the deck later. I hope you do ask for it. Happy to email it to you so you can get all of these links and some of the cool pictures that I use in my images. Gen AI images, of course. Building holistic resilience has 3 components that I'd like to espouse, right? Proactive partnerships, meaning let's talk about breach with you as a third party before a breach actually happens. Let's escalate and say, okay, what would you do if we told you we were breached? Or what would we do if you told me that I have to shut off your access as a vendor because you just got breached? Holistic resilience is, I think, combining third-party risk management, continuous monitoring, and incident detection into a unified strategy. We need to be able to have continuous monitoring, and that's not easy to do, especially, some people publish status dot, right? Status dot, I don't know, google.com, and it'll show you all of the different Google services and whether they're down at the moment. So it's useful, right? If you have a service that relies on that. And so it's nice to have people publish this, but it's not structured enough to be consumed, in a regular API-based way. It's just a way for people to go and say, oh, I'm not even going to bother opening up this ticket because, Zoom is having a bad day, and we know Zoom's not working at the moment, right? And so you have status.zoom.com, I'm sure. And then key metrics. What are some of the right KPIs, key performance indicators, that we should be tracking to evaluate third-party risk and their monitoring effectiveness? So what's in place if you don't have holistic resilience? You have reactive engagements with your service providers. It's when your hair's on fire because something's going wrong instead of proactive. And something bad has happened, right? You should really learn how to talk to these folks ahead of time and bring in outside counsel, right? Do a tabletop exercise. Do a Google, I think their DevOps and SRE teams used to call it, let's play the wheel of misfortune. And spin the wheel and figure out what's going to break today, and does everyone know where the incident response steps are to deal with that particular breakage? Your program is basically wearing blinders, to keep you from actually seeing real risk. if you don't have this sort of proactive partnership and holistic approach. And the metrics that you use might be superficial, right? They might be unchanging, or they could be meaningless at the worst case. So if you have a brain dead EDR, right, endpoint detection tool and remediation tool that uses signature-based malware detection, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a dashboard that always looks green, because no one's using this kind of malware that's like got a signature that's in those databases for Symantec and other tools. It's polymorphic payloads, right, that's generated separate binary with a separate hash and signature going to every person's inbox. And of course, like I said, the biggest risk to OT is IT, so you have to protect both. And there's just some of these things, dashboards, you need to have some degree of false positives, just so you know your monitor is working, right? And so I like to architect every now and then. I'll go fire off a really fun tool called Stratus Red Team from Datadog. And I'm evil. I might do it on like July 4th and, fire off like a backdoor IAM account on AWS and figure out if the B team on my SOC, is up to snuff and to escalate to me within 10, 15 minutes, right? Or in Christmas Eve or something, right? And it's not hard because it's automated, it uses YAML, it builds these complex, vulnerable infrastructures for you on purpose. I didn't put that in the slide notes, but what I'll do is Stratus Red Team. Red Team GitHub. Everyone should use these kinds of tools. They're very cool, very fun, and they get better all the time. You can check your cloud service providers, whether it's Azure, Google, or Oracle, Microsoft. There's all sorts of things that can be deployed against all of these infrastructures. So I think, I put it into the chat, Stratus Red Team. Anyway, so that's one fun tool that I forgot to include in the notes, but you have it now. And then looking at the holistic approaches, right? Proactive partnerships, continuous collaboration, talk to people before things go bad, figure out what the escalation paths are, have their phone numbers ready. Maybe you don't even have access to your email when email goes down, right? How do you reach out to your vendors? You need to have it printed, maybe on a laminated card or in a 3-ring binder or something, and stored in people's houses redundantly in case the entire documentation system is offline at the moment. How do you escalate? Shared accountability, fostering a culture of trust. It's important for us. And like I said, one of the things I did in March of 2022 was to work with the Santa Fe group, creators and maintainers of the SIG assessments shared. It's now owned by OneTrust. And we finally published this concept. Like I said, I worked with BitSight, Black Kite, Panorase, Risk Recon, and Security Scorecard. And we published a unified third-party continuous monitoring cyber taxonomy. And so I loved it, to be able to get everyone to sort of harmonize. And what does that mean? If you think about it, someone says, oh, this is, the morning star. And someone else says, no, that's the evening star. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. They're both the planet Venus, right? It just depends what time of day you're looking at it, right? And so we don't want cybersecurity monitoring to use different terms for things. So harmonizing the taxonomy and words that are used for stuff is good. It raises all boats, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. And so that was really the goal there, was to have this sort of shared accountability and consistency between the vendors and insights of these security ratings companies. And when I talk about holistic resilience, I like to make fun of Microsoft and its sort of Microsoft 360 product, right? Because now everything's like blah, blah, blah 360. And it's supposed to be obviously 360 degrees of visibility. But because Microsoft had this product, everyone's moved on. Now they talk about One, right? There's ADP One, and there's like OneDrive and Google One and Workspace One and Sentinel One. And I'm like, that's kind of, I know what you're getting at, but it's kind of boring. I like this idea of 720. It's like a dome of 360 on top and a dome of 360 on the bottom, and it represents the dark web, right? And so this idea of 720 degrees of visibility and control, it's kind of radical, right? It's like a skateboard or Tony Hawk kind of thing, right? And so when you're behind the keyboard of your company computer, and when you're behind the keyboard, at a Thanksgiving gathering at a family, you have to think and be skeptical about the emails, about the networks, about the risk. And so that's what I try to do with my security awareness programs. Holistic resilience, thinking about security all the time, not just when you're at work. Then better business continuity can come from this as well. Better partnerships, continuous collaboration, information sharing and analysis centers, ISACs. I was a part of 12 different ISACs when I was at Security Scorecard. There's industry ones for the financial services. There's other ones for oil and natural gas. I joined all of those, gave presentations on third-party risk and monitoring, continuous monitoring. Did threat intelligence briefings on Log4j and things like that. But like I said, a bunch of companies were touting this whole one stuff, and so I like to go 720 instead. Key metrics. So percentage of third parties with critical issues and findings. I think that's a good thing to monitor. Average risk rating of the portfolio of your vendors over time. Intel, like I said, has like 20,000 vendors in a security scorecard portfolio, and they're being continuously monitored on a daily basis. And so you can see if the risk of that portfolio is going up or down over time. What are the most common risks that are surfacing? And then you can use your team, your vendor risk management team, to go out and talk to them and help improve their security posture. Because again, Intel might have good security, but all the vendors that provide stuff to them might not. What percentage of your service providers have a SOC 2, right? Or at SOC 2 Type 2, which is continuous assertion in US businesses. Or if you're international, multinational, ISO 27001, right? The 2022 version. How much, what frequency of audit and compliance activities do your third parties have, right? And to your service providers that are critical to you. What's your mean time to respond, your MTTR? We're like, we need to be like a pack of meerkats. We're all looking out in front of our den over the horizon, scanning for threats, and we bark whenever one of us sees something unusual. That way, the whole pack is protected, and we benefit from each pair of eyes, right? So that's why I think our collective resilience and our information and threat intelligence sharing is one of the things where we can actually win over the threat actors and not be as challenged by their advancements on the dark web and their ability to innovate faster than us. So practical steps, immediate actions. Conduct a tabletop exercise. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of your third-party vendors, right? Implement continuous monitoring for critical assets. Longer term, invest in threat intelligence sharing. Develop a playbook of vendor-related incident response. Foster cybersecurity awareness across your supply chain. Continuous monitoring doesn't have to be super expensive. There's simple ways to capture, even if just a third-party API is up or down, right? You can do ping tests and basic like hello world type monitoring checks to see if it comes back with a response or it says server 500 error, the API is down, right? And that puts a timestamp around it, not what they said the availability was, but what you measure it to be. And of course, you need to use multiple testing locations and require 2 out of 3 testing locations to be down. Otherwise, you could have flapping, right? You could have sort of like intermittent failures that aren't really failures. You don't want to wake everyone up on the other side of the pager duty to have one monitoring test go red in the middle of the night just through a fluke. And of course, you should configure a Slack channel with RSS feeds that have all the status pages. Most of the companies that publish a status page, they also publish an RSS feed. And so you can just subscribe to your Slack channel. You say /feed space subscribe and then the URL. And that way you don't even have to go to the web page. You just go to this one channel that has nothing but status pages for all your third parties. And they're automatically pushing messages at you saying there's been a degraded incident, in this region for this AWS environment or for this Azure service. And that way, you can have quickly ascertain whether you're monitoring, something that you have to fix or something that they have to fix. And you at least get to keep tabs on it. Then I throw this in. I got engaged, with using the Area Maritime Security Committee for Sector New York. We did a sector-wide tabletop exercise, over 200 people participating, different entities and organizations. And there must be equivalent events happening, in the provinces. So with the last half hour, I just wanted to throw a few sides of what I did for Cyber Alberta back in January. So tabletop exercise, one of the best ways to get resources and priority out of upper management to help fix some of the things that you may, as an individual working in a company, worried about and you can't address. You don't have budget, you don't have priority. They don't know it's important. So I did this scenario called Utter Chaos, UDDER, and it involved attacks on the Calgary water treatment plant by an imaginary activist group that were militant vegetarians. And so I don't have time to go through the whole demo, but let me jump actually to the end here and just show you, and then I'll go back and show you these slides I'm rapidly running through. But here's what I did. This was fun. Right. There's the first slide. Yeah. So this is the water treatment process, right? You got the Bow River, you got the Elbow River, you got 2 water treatment plants. They're going to be building a third because there was a disruption to one of the major pipelines. It wasn't an attack. It was just aging infrastructure. And there was water rationing that happened last summer, as you all probably know. So that was the trigger for me to have a cyber, event around the same kind of thing. And there's all sorts of sensors and cleaning and things that go on. And I think it was in 2024, the water treatment department's operating costs were something like 1.8 million, and the city proposed borrowing $1 billion to fund water infrastructure projects and building a third treatment plant. So this tabletop I put together was in the year 2030, and it had to do with the water treatment plant being attacked. And so I'll show you. There was a hacktivist, October 1st, 8:20 a.m. There was a Cowtown. This is only the beginning email that came in, and this is the beginning of the attack. And this is what I mocked up, what the artifact looked like. Dear City of Calgary, we're tired of governments allowing companies to prioritize cow farming over basic human needs and services, right? So it was like a hacktivist thing. And you have this like T plus 10 minutes. It's the wall clock versus the game clock, right? So you go through several days or potentially years of scenario injects, and it's great to get people to just practice their incident response and think about what's happening. So in this case, it was like, we had to assess the credibility of the threat. We had to develop a communication strategy. These are all the things that should have been the response of the people that would be doing this tabletop. With that, let me just give you a little bit of the slides where I talk about what's interesting to build an effective tabletop exercise. And that'll take us right up to the end of the hour here. So yeah, this was the one that I had put together. It was a demo, right? Because I didn't actually have, the government of Alberta on the line for an hour or two to walk through it and have the CISO and everything there. So it was just sort of like a demo, like I said. And this is my deck that talks about why tabletop is important, and why you should think about proposing one with your business and the companies that you serve and support or work for. Again, it's a modest investment of time and cost, 2-4 hours, half day usually, generates a lot of momentum and to remediate gaps that have been identified in process, in documentation, on teams, in roles and responsibilities, and of course in software and capabilities. It actually counts as a BCPDR activity, business continuity planning and disaster recovery, for compliance. So you get to check the box and say, well, we didn't actually fail over our hospital to the secondary data center, but we did do a good hospital what if scenario, a tabletop. And you, of course, don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can use templates that have been drafted for critical infrastructure and IoT. And I will give you those links in a minute. And you can, of course, demonstrate the importance of depth of bench. So one of the fun things I like to do during a tabletop is if somebody is doing a really good job of like answering questions and knowing the process and leading the response, I'll take them off the table. I'll say, you have just been threatened. The threat actors know where you live. They emptied your bank accounts. They know how many kids you have. You have to go to a safe house. You're no longer allowed to participate for the next 20 minutes of the actual game, right? And that forces depth of bench. And I'll take the CISO off the table, right? Or I'll take the CTO off the table, because those are the usual candidates, right, who know how to do incident response. And then everyone's just like, holy shit, who's our deputy CISO? We don't have a deputy CISO. I was like, well, who's going to do it in the absence of the CISO being around? I don't know. Who even has access to check these systems if the CISO is taken off the table in the game? What's a good tabletop exercise? It's experience facilitator. It's identifying learning points ahead of time. I actually come up at the end of the deck first and then work backwards and say, these are the lessons learned that you should have picked up. And I work with the IT people and say, what is it you need? What do you want a logical outcome to be? Do you want them to invest in having a security operations center because you don't have one? Do you want them to invest in mobile device management for laptops because you don't have it? What is it you want to have as a takeaway? We will structure the tabletop to help them reach that conclusion and do it in a very plausible manner, right? And include other business units, bring in legal, right? Although it's expensive sometimes if you want to bring outside counsel. But I did a scenario with lawyers where they had to do a preservation order, right? There was someone suing the company and they had to say, okay, you're not allowed to delete any emails or documents for these users. And that preservation hold can exist for several years because it doesn't go to trial right away. And so do you even have the capability of stopping someone from deleting the mailbox of someone in HR that was accused of sexual harassment or something, right? It doesn't have to be a cyber attack. It could be other types of threats. to the business. Delivering effective tabletops. It's a discussion-based exercise where we, have content, discuss their roles. Facilitator initiates it, has a scenario in mind. Like I said, there's lots of fun questions that can be asked. Injects that can be created. Most organizations are not ready to run the tabletop themselves the first time around. You need to procure the talents of someone like Ammolite or others. When I was at Security Scorecard, no, when I was at ASCAP, I used Raytheon to run the tabletop, and it was amazing. They did a great job. And then we started doing mini tabletops for certain departments internally. So a good first scenario to run is ransomware. The prospect of it hitting your organization is very real and very high, and the response time and mitigation techniques, would be pretty important. Shown here are some theater blocking notation symbols that are used in theater. So I just wanted some kind of visual that sort of showed that you're acting things out. Unfortunately, this book does not exist. I use the For Dummies generator webpage, which has a link in my slide notes. But basically, if you're like, oh, I want to get a copy of that book, I'm like, sorry, this is just a prop, right, that I created. But what kind of scenario do you want to run? Start, like I said, with a security vendor leading your first tabletop exercise. Make sure it's a quality experience, and everyone, can have in-house exercises later after they sort of build up this muscle. Some of the things that come from the Center for Internet Security, they have 6 examples, and they have the quick fix, the malware infection, unplanned attack, cloud compromise, financial break-in, flood zone. Obviously, global pandemic, avian flu, was nothing but a tabletop exercise until 2020, right? But we all lived through a tabletop exercise for the next 2-3 years, right? Because never would someone have said, everyone work from home, discuss, right? And so that was a fascinating element that I like to mention humorously. We couldn't get laptop and toilet paper, right? There was a lot of supply chain disruptions during COVID. What else? Delivering effective tabletops. CISA has some tabletop exercise packages that you can download. And it comes with all of the materials you might want to use and run. And again, have someone to help you do it the first time. But it's useful, like I said, critical infrastructure, dams, water treatment, power generation, all the structure is there, all the assets that you need are there. So get one of these templates and play around with it. Effective tabletops can include lots of different department names. Make it as realistic as possible. Tailor it. If your company uses Carbon Black, do a screenshot of a Carbon Black dashboard. If they use CrowdStrike, right, Symantec, whatever. Make sure you have a real ransomware family or strain if you're going to do a variant. Don't actually release it, but reference real world strains and variants. Don't just invent some kind of like mucky muck executable. Invent a threat actor who publishes on Twitter, right? If it's a hacktivist scenario, that was the one that we did for ASCAP. Include a secondary attack as well of data exfiltration. Because a lot of times they get you to pay the ransom, not because you don't have backups, maybe you do have backups, but they stole the data and they're going to sell it on the dark web. So that's the extortion play. It's the double whammy. And then even sometimes they'll go a third level and they'll do a DDoS attack. And so now they're encouraging you to pay because they stole your data. And now they're making your website go offline because you don't have DDoS protections. Thankfully, Children's Hospital of Alberta does have a Cloudflare subscription, which means they do have DDoS protections. But anyway, you can create mock images of bleeping computer news pages, CNN headlines. I did one for like the Calgary Herald, and I mocked up, a headline about this hacktivist, attack against water treatment. And you need to help people realize that to get in front of the narrative for comms, that they need to have HR and legal approved messaging saying, hey, there was a breach. You can write that now. Right. The only thing that's going to be different is the date, right? When was it discovered? When are you publishing? So write all the stuff you can left of boom and get it blessed and approved, like I said, by outside counsel, legal, whoever has to review it. Failing that moment of rising up and owning the narrative as the event occurs is a great takeaway for a tabletop exercise. People start to realize, oh yeah, we should really write the press release about the breach today. Because then we don't have to get approvals, and it won't take us like 3-4 days more to get all the approvals in place before publishing something. Because the street, aka the internet, will write the narrative for you, and they will not be kind. So you have to get in front of that attack. It's the second attack. The first attack is the threat actor. Second attack is all the armchair quarterbacks that come at you on Monday morning saying, you didn't do this. How come you didn't do that? And then they fire the CISO. Delivering good tabletops. Who to invite? Elements of effective tabletops, right, include inviting senior leadership, of course, HR, legal, marketing, finance, IT, engineering, operations. These are all important. And what else? Yeah, do you have the ability to do preservation holds and to block the deletion of records? Threat actors can try to delete them as well if they've taken over accounts. Give them a free lunch. Do like 10 till 2, break for an hour in between. That helps get people to commit. Bring in some nice vendor swag. Give them a moleskin, a notebook, a nice cross pen, a tote bag. It just makes them feel important, and they should feel important because it's not just the individual contributors that do incident response, right? It's everyone in the company can be involved in these scenarios. And like I said, doing it like on a Friday is useful. And I suggest like 10 or 11 o'clock as a start time. Run the wall clock, and most incident response in the real world lights up on a Friday at 7 p.m. after everyone's gone home, right? But checking things on holidays, like I said, doing QA testing. It's not just for engineers. And then here's a Dilbert comic, of course, help, help. That's our incident response plan. Sometimes people have nothing written down. They just assume we'll just deal with it when it happens. And guess what? You're going to do a bad job if you don't think about it ahead of time and at least write down a 2 or 3 page response plan. Use peer pressure to prevent last-minute no-shows. Bring tactiles and fidget spinners to keep people occupied during the exercise, because not everyone likes to listen to someone walking through a scenario. Put little doodle space on the printouts, for like mazes. Executives love this actually, right? It occupies part of their brain while they're listening. They need to have someone there to doodle. And then they're like, no, don't take this, don't throw it away. I made this doodle, right? And so it's useful to, like I said, get everyone to be a contributor and to take the leadership off the board, make sure you identify depth of bench issues. And like I said, the VIPs and the white glove, everyone should be treated like a white glove VIP during these tabletops. What else? Keep the scenario topic secret. Use, like I said, peer pressure to prevent last minute no-shows. Have the attendee name a delegate, in case they can't appear. So you at least have someone from general counsel, right, or inside counsel, even if they're not chief general counsel. And they should always, like I said, walk away feeling important, and that the real work is going to be executed by operations. But there's always going to be a second war room where the executives have to gather. And that's what a good tabletop will do. So you have the agenda, you have the goals, you have the ground rules, which is don't fight the scenario. Oftentimes you'll have a technical person there saying that could never happen because, and then they fill in the blank. I was like, stop it. This is a hypothetical. We didn't have time to learn all of your systems. Stop fighting the scenario. This is not Star Trek, Kobayashi Maru maneuver where, Kirk was able to reprogram the scenario of never being able to win so that he could win. Shown here is a Japanese soba delivery on a bicycle. Pretty cool image, not really related to tabletops, just fun thing to point out. And then, of course, the delivery agenda. So 5 minutes intro, 40 minutes of the scenario walkthrough, lessons learned, 15 minutes, and then lunch for an hour. So you can run shorter tabletops, but not until everyone's learned how it works and gotten a sense of the nature of it. And says, like I said, don't fight the scenario. What else? Delivery, do something called a pre-mortem. NASA, I think, came up with this idea. Everyone talks about post-mortem, right? How did things fail and what went wrong and how can we have lessons learned? A pre-mortem is how will this project fail and try to get ahead of it and to try to get ahead of these failure scenarios and get everyone brainstorming before it fails. Of course, distribute the incident response plan ahead of time. If you don't have one, that's obviously a problem. You're going to have one written and then train them on it before you can actually do a tabletop that tests their knowledge of the incident response plan. Let's see what else. The concept of pre-mortem, I think, like I said, is important. How will it fail? Imagining that the event has already occurred, it increases your ability to correctly identify reasons for future outcomes by like 30%. So there's a link to the Harvard Business Review pre-mortem write-up on what NASA had done there. Let's see. I say don't fight the scenario. Take the CTO off the table. Yep. What else? Let's see. The scenario begins to unfold, then you have talking points and questions, then you have a new inject, then you have talking points and questions, and you sort of reveal them on the slides because you like to predict what they should be talking about. Did they catch everything? One of the big things, of course, is, has anyone decided to call the cyber insurance carrier? When you're having a cyber insurance event, if you don't notify your carrier, you might not be able to file a claim. They have like 24 hours, 72 hours, sometimes immediately. And if they believe that you didn't tell them because you hadn't classified it as an event yet, you could end up eating the cost and having cyber insurance for no reason and have no repayment on your claim. So it's important, like I said, to have these slides set up for people to have an after action report, to have good sense of what's going to happen, what did we learn, what went well, document this. Did everyone follow the incident response plan? Did someone remember to call the cyber insurance broker and say, hey, we had an incident? No backups, no backups of laptops. There's different scenarios that you can program or inject and include in a scenario like tabletops. And that way you find executive sponsors and owners of those risks, and you put it on the risk register, and then you make sure someone gets tagged with it. And then lastly, who's responsible for what? This is usually the collision, of what happens. And of course, law enforcement. If it's a water treatment in Calgary, when are you going to notify law enforcement? When are you going to notify the National Security Response Center? What are the criteria for escalating an event that you think is going to become an important event for them to pay attention to? So these are important questions, and we exercise our mind by doing these kinds of what-if scenarios, shedding light on how prepared you are or not for an attack, improving your readiness, checking your response plan, seeing if it has to be updated or even created in the first place. And then here I have those last few slides, which was the scenario, the water treatment, the inject, the artifact of what the email looked like. And I actually used the real name of the Calgary Water, municipal, John Jagorinek. And, he's been in the job for a while. And how long does it take John to check his email? Who is he forwarded to after? And so I try to make things as real as possible. So that it's immersive. And then this was, of course, no detection of ransomware. You might actually say, okay, it's been a week and no one's detected it's there yet. That could be even worse. So lastly, the conclusion is, in today's interconnected world, the most vulnerable of all is the one who fails to look in the mirror. So let's work together and act clearly and decisively to mitigate bad things from happening. So here's the QR code if you want to send me an email. It is a mail to tag, and I'll be glad to send you a copy of the slides. If you're watching a recording of this in the future, I'm not sure, did we do recording? Yeah, okay. Feel free to use the same mail to tag. I sometimes get emails, a month or two later where someone's watching and says, hey, I'd like a copy of those slides. Happy to entertain any questions for those that have stuck it out for this extended lecture of risk and OT and IT and storytelling. So thank you all for your time and attention. And if you do have questions in QA, or if you want to come off mute, I think we can allow that, right? And or maybe not, maybe you have to type them somewhere.